Now, when my dad was a kid, he saw a show on TV where a character audited classes at an Ivy League school. Didn't sign up, didn't apply, didn't pay tuition, but the guy went in, sat down, and listened to every single lecture, took notes, and then learned all the information that Ivy Leaguers learned. I don't know what TV show it was, but when he was a kid, they only had three channels, so it couldn't have been anything uh, too weird. But my dad thought he had a genius idea from this show on one of the three channels that a lot of other people were watching, I guess. That he thought it was genius. And he told my grandpa about it, thinking that my grandpa would be on board, that he think my dad was a genius for realizing that. But when he told my grandpa, he just said, Grandpa, that they don't care what you want to know. They just want to see a piece of paper. Now, who would have guessed that he could have won a Nobel Prize at the time? Because Spence didn't win the Nobel Prize for his theory of the signaling value of education until like within the past 20 years. Up until this point, we talked about the human capital theory of education. So what my dad was thinking is sitting down, taking notes, and learning all this stuff, that's going to make you a better worker. But there's this other angle, the signaling theory of education. According to signaling theory, workers acquire education not to become more productive, but to signal some internal quality that firms aren't able to see. So the human capital theory of education, we assume that workers go to school to increase their productivity. They're building these skills, becoming better workers, and because they're better workers, they're going to be able to earn more. Signaling theory is different. It suggests that education doesn't actually increase your productivity, but it signals to your employers that you're a high quality worker. It tells them you possess qualities like intelligence, perseverance, work ethic, the ability to study or learn on your own. And these are valuable things in the workplace and make a worker better off in the long run for the firm. In this view, education serves as a way to sort of differentiate workers, not necessarily a way to make them more capable from day one. That's why firms only care about the piece of paper. They know that it signals that the person does have the skills and the ability to learn on the job. I'm sure when you're graduating college, you heard at least one older relative or someone working tell you that now that you're graduating, your employer is going to train you for everything that actually matters on the job. Nothing you learned in school really matters that much. That kind of goes into the signaling theory. So now let's imagine that there are two types of workers: hardworking, skilled workers and less skilled workers. Employers want to hire the skilled workers, but they can't tell right away who is skilled and who isn't. That's something that's more internal than something that they see externally. So what the firm will try to do is look for clues, like how much education someone has, to try to figure that out. So in what we call separating equilibrium, education helps to separate these two groups of workers. Skilled workers go to school and they get degrees because it's easier and less costly for them to do so, while the less skilled workers don't go to school, don't get that same education because it's too hard or it's not worth the effort for them. Employers can then use that education as a signal to identify the workers and pay them higher wages if they're higher skilled and lower wages if they're lower skilled. And the idea is that skilled workers and less skilled workers separate themselves by having those different educational choices. And this separation helps employers make decisions about who to hire, how much to pay, and what kind of role to sort them into. So now let's consider an example with two types of workers, low skilled and high skilled. Low skilled, low productivity workers choose not to obtain this whatever education that this firm is asking. In this case, we just call it Y bar, this specific degree. They voluntarily signal their low productivity. Meanwhile, high productivity workers choose to get that level of education, that Y bar degree, and separate themselves from the others. The worker knows if they're high skilled or low skilled. We know that about ourselves, but the firms can't readily observe that. However, the education level can be a signal that underlying quality, and education is easy enough for an employer to observe. So firms try to follow this signaling idea. Any worker with education Y bar is considered high quality, and they're hired for the role with a higher skill and paid a wage of $300,000 in this example. Workers without that skill level, or without that education level, are assumed to be low skilled and given the lower paying roles, in this case only $200,000. Because workers with Y bar years of college are paid more, workers will all want to get that level of education. All things being equal, they would prefer to get that education and to make more money. However, obtaining that education is expensive. We'll say that obtaining credits are more expensive for less skilled workers. Now, we say this because they might need to pay for tutors, they might have to take extra classes to get them ready. They may need to retake classes, or may just be a way to signify that they need more effort. But for higher skilled workers, it should cost less. So in this example, we'll say $25,001 to get the degree for low skilled workers and $20,000 to get the degree for high skilled workers. When we have this different cost for high skilled versus low skilled workers, it creates a separating equilibrium. In this case, the lower skilled workers do not seek the higher education standard, that Y bar, because of the additional cost to them. On the other hand, high skilled workers do get the degree. So in this case, workers are perfectly willing to reveal their skill level through this signal of the education program. So if you look at the figure on the left, the lower skilled worker, if they choose to go to school for 0 years, in this case, that means they choose not to go to college. They're going to get paid the difference between the horizontal line and the cost of Y bar. So that's going to put us in that area. They get paid the cost of education will be too high for the low skilled workers, so it is better for them to forego school and take the $200,000. The textbook does the math and shows that at $25,001, the low skilled workers will only get 3.9 years of school, just slightly less than the required degree. Since firms won't pay you more for just a portion of that school, the workers with lower skills will not find it worthwhile to obtain any years of education towards that degree. So they won't even be in this area. Your choice is between 0 and between Y. Higher skilled workers will find it worthwhile. They're shown here, figure on the right. As long as the years of education for them are less than 5 when you do the math. So for high skilled workers, this college degree is worthwhile. Now, it is essential to remember that for signaling to work, that some people must use the signal and some people must not use the signal. If everyone chooses to use it or everyone chooses to not use it, then of course it doesn't reveal anything to firms. So we'll wrap up the chapter here with this slide. So we can think of education as both a signal of the innate skills of the individual and as a way to build human capital. In reality, there is some of each going on. So we just talked about signaling. Schooling acts as a tool to differentiate between high and low skilled workers. But for this to work, schooling must be more costly for low ability workers compared to high ability workers. There are ways to see maybe there's some way to decrease the cost of college tuition. So in our previous example, suddenly low skilled workers are going to college and getting that Y bar degree. Suddenly that signal breaks down as firms slowly realize over time, just because someone has that degree doesn't mean that they're skilled enough. That would make the signal no longer effective. It wouldn't work. But for the time being, for that example that we walked through, employers can use education as a signal to identify those with greater potential. When they do that, they can make it a key factor in hiring and wage decisions. This is even if schooling doesn't increase a particular worker's human capital, even if they're not learning anything that is going to actually help them on their job, it can still have a positive effect on the broader economy. It can help sort the higher skilled workers into the roles that they can actually use those skills that require that level of skills, and sort the lower skilled workers who don't have the education into positions that require lower skills. So this is what we mean to the social return to schooling, that education can lead to a more productive workforce overall. So boosting national income, benefiting society at large. Now, it's important to emphasize that education is more than just a signal. I think there's a lot of value to the signaling theory of education, but that said, it's still obvious that you learn quite a bit in education that you're going to need on the job. There is this human capital development going on. In reality, there's some of both. Education increases a worker's skills and productivity, which is why it's widely accepted that education serves as an investment in human capital. I think people tend to overrate the human capital formation aspect of school, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't build that. I know I learned a lot in school. I hope that you're learning at least a decent amount from me. And if not me in this course, then from the other courses in this program, that you're going to be taking back with you and actually using on the job in human resources. So in conclusion, education acts as both a signal that helps employers identify capable workers and as an investment that enhances that workers' productivity. There are differences between economists and between people in education and the general public for how much of this is human capital improvements and how much of this is signaling, but both are definitely still present. And understanding this balance can help us better appreciate how education shapes the labor market and individual outcomes. But it can also help you as a human resources representative. Hopefully, it can give you some sort of insight to understand just where the education that you're requiring on a new job application is just looking for a signal versus where you need to know that the person has that human capital, that they have the skills necessary for the job. I want someone working in healthcare or someone building a bridge to learn quite a bit in school to develop the human capital through their degree so that they're able to effectively do those things right out of the gate because you need certain skills for those jobs. Whereas for other positions, maybe for sales, if you're requiring a college degree, maybe you just want to know that the person is able to communicate, that they're able to work hard. So then you really just want a signal for that job more than the human capital development. Different roles within a company are going to have different requirements for human capital versus just know that you have someone who can learn on the job. And that will be incredibly important for you to be able to separate the two. So sorry, I got very long-winded at the end there. We'll end the discussion for this chapter here.